Which city? Yep. So we are. So we just. Yep. So we are. So we just arrived in Ephesus. So now this is where we really pick up our story from tonight. So if everyone's got the handout and a pen, we're ready to go. And I'll be a little bit more specific with the handout in terms of what you've got to fill out when, because one or two seemed to struggle with that last time. Thanks, Josh. I'll point it out. So let's read our first reference, or reference 3, which is Acts 18, verse 24 and 26. So if we can get the next readers to read that. Got where we got up to.
Now a Jew named Apollos, a native of Alexandria, came to Ephesus. He was an eloquent man and competent in the scriptures.
He had been instructed in the way of the Lord, and being fervent in spirit, he spoke and taught accurately things concerning Jesus. But he knew only the baptism of John.
He began to speak boldly in the synagogue. But when Priscilla and Aquila heard him, they took him aside and explained to him the way of God more accurately.
Great. So in this third reference here in Acts, what we see here is it really provides us with a powerful example and a really an effective snapshot of discipleship and the collaborative nature of what happened in the early ministry, particularly what happens here in these verses with Priscilla and Aquila and also Apollos. So when we look at the timeline, again, this is where we got to last time. So again, looking at the timeline and just filling that in. So that's the first two. And when we come to Acts, or the reference now, which is the third one, we're still in Ephesus and it's a bit past AD 52. So this is the time period where this incident took place. And here in these verses, we're introduced to a person called Apollos. Hopefully everyone's got that. So when we think about Apollos, we're introduced to him in these verses. What do these verses tell us about Apollos and his understanding of the scriptures? There's a lot that these verses tell us. Can people just call out some of those things? Mighty in the scriptures, yes. Eloquent. Yep, from Alexandria. What else about him in the scriptures? Instructed in the way of the Lord, baptism of John knew little. So when we look at what Priscilla and Aquila, when they come, they're listening to this man from Apollos. As John said, he was from Alexandria. We know that that was a major intellectual and cultural centre, known for its large Jewish population, and it also had a significant library. And as a result of those things, probably the background is what led to Apollos and probably contributed to him being an eloquent speaker and fairly deep in his understanding of scriptural knowledge. So when we look at those things, we can see that he was an eloquent man. He was fervent in spirit, speaking boldly. So we can see that this was a person that was passionate in his delivery and fearless in proclaiming his message publicly. We can see that he was competent in the scriptures, which implies he had a really strong command of the Jewish texts, and he was able to draw connections from those and argue effectively. We see he was instructed in the way of the Lord and spoke accurately concerning the things of Jesus, which really shows he had a genuine and correct understanding of Jesus, particularly his identity and his teachings. But where we see the limitation is he only knew about the baptism of John, which understands that while he understood the message of repentance about the coming of the Messiah, it appears he lacked knowledge of the baptism and that fuller grasp of Jesus' death and resurrection. So when we look at the key insights from this reference chapter 3, or reference, this third reference, the first one of those we want to point out is this incomplete knowledge. So we can see that Apollos was passionate, he was eloquent, but his understanding of the scriptures was limited, knowing only John's baptism. So that's the first thing we want to mention. And crucially, having realised this, we see that Priscilla and Aquila take him aside, Apollos, and then they go in and explain to him the way of God more accurately, again, which he was very receptive of. So we have this image of him, and here's some commentary.
And that's where Priscilla and Aquila come in, kind of an unexpected pair to mentor someone like Apollos.
Exactly. They saw his potential, his passion. And instead of, calling him out publicly, they took him aside privately. Acts says they explained to him the way of God more accurately. It sounds like really humble, respectful mentorship. It filled in those crucial theological blanks without crushing his spirit.
Really?
And yeah, fascinating. There was this couple, tent makers, not necessarily apostles, who did it.
So he gets this deeper understanding. How did that change things? What did it mean for his ministry?
Well, it seems like it really amplified his impact, especially when he went to Corinth. The text says he greatly helped those who through grace had believed, and that he powerfully argued against opponents in public debates, showing from the scriptures that Jesus was the Christ. Really effective stuff.
Paul even mentions him, right? Something about planting and watering.
Yes, that famous line in 1 Corinthians, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth.
So here we see, describe this situation where we picture Priscilla and Aquila talking to Apollos. So the second insight that we want to get from these verses is this humble mentorship, where Priscilla and Aquila privately and accurately explain the way of God to Apollos, showing the power of gentle guidance. So it was really about this gentle guidance, the way in which they went about this. And again, this really illustrates to us that Priscilla and Aquila were really more than tent makers. And in this example, we see that they were mentors. They were personally invested in Apollos. And this nurturing approach to discipleship, marked by a patient instruction and gentle guidance, really exemplifies how profound understanding is fostered. And so the third insight we also want to take from these verses is this teachable spirit that Apollos humbly accepted further instruction, enabling him to grow into an even more powerful advocate for Christ. So as you take down those things, we're going to break in a moment to have a look at some questions that relate to this. But the lesson I want to pick up from this third reference is as follows. It's this one here. It's all about gentle guidance. And here we read that effective spiritual instruction and correction, as exemplified by Priscilla and Aquila, are rooted in gentleness, patience, humility, and kindness. And then when we look at those verses that demonstrate some aspects of that gentle guidance, we can pull the following, which really just summarises all those quotes, that truth is best communicated and received in an atmosphere of respect and love, thereby fostering genuine understanding, and repentance. Ultimately, gentle guidance proves more powerful in facilitating growth and knowledge of God's way than abrasive methods. So again, that's really the lesson we really want to pick up from these key insights and this reference to Aquila and Priscilla in Acts 18. So as we think about this incident, again, just two questions just to talk through in your groups for a few minutes. The ones on the screen. How do Priscilla and Aquila exemplify effective mentoring or discipleship? And I've given some ideas there. And why do you think Priscilla and Aquila took him aside instead of correcting him publicly? So yeah, if you can have a bit of a chat about that, and then we'll review those answers and move on. Give you a few minutes to do that. And that goes in the questions and answers box. You guys reckon you've done? Good. Okay, Shem reckons they're done. So just a couple of responses in relation to question one. Any answers?
Some more senior leaders or something, they kind of exemplify what's good about him, not what's bad, and kind of just build on and help them out with what he could be rough on.
Yes, that's good.
I found it interesting, like the contrast between how they deal with Apollos and how he's dealing with like the Jews. It says he powerfully refuted them in public.
Yes. Well, that's a good contrast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they don't do that to him.
Yep.
They see he's on the hand.
Like it. Yep. Very good. Contrast. So again, these are just some of the ideas that I picked up for a response for the first one. And what about the second question? Any responses there? Yes. Great. Yep, absolutely. So calling them out, shame, embarrass, absolutely. That's good. And certainly, again, some of the other quick ideas I had certainly build on that, sort of fosters receptiveness when you take people aside. You're building others up and doing it more privately. Very good. More questions to come. So moving on then, let's move on to our next reference where we come across Priscilla and Aquila, which is in 1 Corinthians 16 and verse 19. So I'm not sure, are we still on this table with readers? If someone could read that out for us.
The creatures of Asia send you greetings. Aquila and Priscilla, together with the creature in their house, send you hearty greetings in the Lord.
Excellent. So again, it's just a small verse, but again, quite impactful. So when we look at the timeline, where does this put us? Well, we find they're still in Ephesus a little bit long in AD 56, or just after, or thereabouts in terms of the timeline. And so even though this verse is short in 1 Corinthians 16, the verse still offers us two significant insights into the life of this early ecclesia. And we can see there, again, when we can picture this early ecclesia, similar to the very, first few months, years of Burnside when we met in homes. Here we can see Priscilla and Aquila doing exactly that. And so we want to build on that in terms of our first key insight is around that household fellowship, where Priscilla and Aquila had the ecclesia in their home, which again underscores the common practice of believers meeting in private homes for worship and for fellowship. And then building on that principle, we have the idea of community connection, where we mentioned that they're there with their brothers and sisters, which really emphasises a strong relational bonds and mutual care that Priscilla and Aquila had with those early believers. And so our homes are fundamental and can be a great dynamic hub of faith. And in many cases, homes can be far more than simple meeting places. They can be spaces that foster deep personal connections. They're fairly accessible without formal structures, so to speak. They're incredibly adaptable to a believer, really evolving their needs and what they're after. And then we find then that it's within these settings that the full spectrum of ecclesial life unfounded in this early first century ecclesia. And from here, they worship, they taught, they fellowship, they cultivated a vibrant, connected body of believers in this environment. And so what we see when we look at those key insights, for me, what I picked as the lesson was this idea around a global family. Where here, Priscilla and Aquila's home is the ecclesia. It's where the early believers identified as a global family. And here they were driven by a shared faith. They had a common mission. And their congregation, like others, really fostered that true unity through mutual connection, support, and collaborative efforts. And again, we're really building on that picture of what happened here in Ephesus from that work that Sim mentioned in his talks a couple of weeks ago. And when we look at those quotes that really support this idea of the one body, the global family, what we get from this that's pivotal is the following, that it really teaches us how important it is to have this genuine connections between ecclesias and recognising our integral role in one singular yet global family committed to preaching the gospel together. And it's amazing how you can go to different countries, and because of that fellowship that we have, feel at one with those that we happen to meet in ecclesias wherever we happen to venture. And so really that's what we want to focus on there for that second reference. And then we move across to our fifth reference, which is in Romans chapter 16 and verse 3 to 5. And here in Romans chapter 16, verse 3 to 5, we have our fifth reference to the work of Priscilla and Aquila. And so wherever we got to in the reading, could we get these verses read, thanks?
Greet Prisca and Aquila, my fellow workers in Christ Jesus.
The risks that next for my life to do so I give thanks from all the churches of the Gentiles who takes love. I'm grateful to the church their house, great my beloved who was the first convert of Christ nation.
Great. So when we come across to this reference in Romans, what we see that at some period of time, just after the other reference, it appears that they're back in Rome. That edict where they had to flee Rome was no longer in place, given that Claudius had now died and passed on. And as a result of that, it seems plausible that Priscilla and Aquila head back to Rome, and whilst there, Paul is penning these words, or his letter to the Romans. And so when we look at the timeline, it looks as though they're back in Rome, and it's, like I said, around just after AD 57 or thereabouts. And when we look at these verses in Romans, we see that again, Priscilla and Aquila are connected. And here it provides really deep insights into their character and the impact that Priscilla and Aquila had, and certainly the nature of the early ecclesia in Rome. And so here we again have this image of both of them returning back to Rome. And we know that Priscilla and Aquila are described here as Paul's valued co-workers. That term signifies a really deep partnership and mutual respect. And in fact, it highlights their active hands-on involvement where they were both working together alongside Paul in spreading the gospel throughout this region. And so when we reflect on, again, the key insights from these verses, no surprise, this concept of being a valued co-worker, where Priscilla and Aquila were essential. They were active partners in Paul's gospel ministry, which again signifies their collaboration and mutual respect. And the other thing that we pick up on is this concept of profound sacrifice. And while these verses don't mention a specific incident, it really implies that at some point Priscilla and Aquila faced significant danger, possibly persecution, to protect Paul or to advance the gospel in some part of the region. And when we think about what it is they did as described here by Paul, we really think about their extreme loyalty, their courage, and their profound sacrifice that they made. And so it is that as we think about these key insights, the thing that really becomes evident is this idea in terms of a lesson around sacrifice, that Priscilla and Aquila risked their necks for Paul, again, really highlighting their commitment to the truth. And when we think about that, it really challenges us to think about what are we willing to sacrifice. And while it might not be our physical lives, it could involve significant personal costs, whether it be our time, our comfort, resources, reputation, or even our careers. And again, when we look at those verses which talk about this idea of sacrifice, we again think about our sacrifice and what we're doing in relation to that sacrifice towards the gospel. And when we think about what sacrifices we are making, how does that demonstrate our depth of love for Christ and our fellow human beings, whether they believers or people we work with, live next to. And as again we think about that, how does that reflect the ultimate sacrifice that was made for us? And as we think about this concept, it really leads us to our next set of questions, which pick up this idea. So again, in your groups, just want you to talk about what does my fellow workers in Christ Jesus imply about their relationship? Again, giving you a few clues around that. But more so in the second one, what does this tell us about their commitment to the gospel when they risk their necks for Paul? So give you a few minutes just to unpack that a little bit. And then we'll get some answers, and then we'll move on to our final reference. Oh, did I go backwards? Or did I not show the questions? There you go.
They shouldn't be.
Yeah, and I think the fact
Yeah. Oh, wait, what are you doing now? What are you doing
You think we're not done? Almost? Well, you have? Almost? Okay, so just coming back to those questions. Anyone got some thoughts around the first one?
Paul saw his work as they were on the same level as him. He didn't see him leading it, but they worked as co-workers.
Yes? Yep.
It hasn't implied shared respect.
Correct.
You get the impression that they're sort of coming up with their own ideas, trying to steer the gospel, much like Paul was doing as well. Instead of just being a follower of Paul, they were using their own initiatives for the gospel.
Yes? Yep. Yeah, and certainly the ideas I had build on exactly those 2 points. And that actively, involvement, being able to do what they could and what worked well in terms of, like you said, spreading the gospel as they worked alongside Paul. And more so too, I think from Paul's perspective, to be able to have that trust in Priscilla and Aquila is also fairly significant as well, that he knew he could rely on them to go out and to really be responsible with spreading the truth. And he was obviously convinced that, they had that one shared purpose. So he was confident that they could go out and do that well. And then the second question, again, just we probably already covered it a bit, but has anyone got any responses or answers to the second question?
thinking that maybe there's a sense that they've got his back.
Yep.
And that's a really powerful thing, like working together with someone to the point of they would die for it.
Correct. Yeah.
It sort of highlights maybe the thing with Apollos as well, like that's just their mode, that's how they are.
Yep.
That's what had Apollos back, that's what pulled back. You can really trust them.
Correct, and particularly around that loyalty, that commitment, that trust. agree. And I think too, to some extent, it also speaks about their courage that despite the circumstances they were in, whether it be severe opposition, they were able to make a stand and do that. So again, there were a couple of thoughts I had as I thought about those two questions upon reading those verses. And certainly the other thing I also wanted to touch on from that verse was, getting back to this concept that it didn't really matter what city Aquila and Priscilla were in. We see that they continually hosted the ecclesia in their home. And, it really speaks of their consistency, but more so around their generous hospitality. The fact that Paul states, not only I, but all the ecclesias of the Gentiles are grateful to them is an amazing thing to be written about this couple. It's a powerful statement to their widespread influence and reputation amongst the believers in the region. They were central to the spread and strengthening of believers in the ecclesias in this significant part of Asia Minor. And their ministry had a ripple effect beyond just their immediate location, as evident from what we read in those verses. And so then we come to our last reference, which is not much, but it's still a reference nevertheless to the writings of Paul. In 2 Timothy 4, verse 19, simply reads, greet Priscilla and Aquila. And again, when we go back to our map, we find that Priscilla and Aquila are now back in Ephesus. And when we look at the timeline, it looks as though we're right here as this has been penned by Paul when he writes his letter to 2 Timothy. That is, Priscilla and Aquila are back in Ephesus at the time. And we know that the Apostle Paul is probably writing from his Roman imprisonment, and specifically sends greetings to Priscilla and Aquila. And this indicates, as we said from reading 2 Timothy 4, that they were back in Ephesus and remained actively still spreading the good news of the gospel there. And then Paul, in this final letter to Timothy, includes his last mention of Priscilla Aquila, which again offers amazing insights into their enduring faithfulness and Paul's deep respect for Priscilla and Aquila. And so even though the verse doesn't say too much, I think the key insights that we gain from this last reference is this idea around enduring faithfulness. Where we see that Priscilla and Aquila were still actively serving and again making them wonderful examples of persevering faithfulness. And then in relation to that, the second thing just want to pick up on is this idea of a relational farewell, where Paul, despite his imminent departure, really sits down and prioritises sending personal greetings to these key individuals, highlighting the deep relational nature of his ministry and also the early ecclesia. And so when we again reflect on those two key insights, the lesson that I came up with thinking about that was this idea of enduring faithfulness, where we see, this essential characteristics of a true follower of Christ, that over many, many years, they were still consistently spreading the truth throughout Asia Minor. And again, when we look at those quotes and summarise them, we can see that enduring faithfulness means steadfastly persevering through trials and consistently serving without weariness, rooted in God's enabling faithfulness. And this long-term dedication is essential for ministry and promises divine commendation and eternal reward. And so when we think about Priscilla and Aquila, we can see that they were more than just tent makers. These two outstanding people were steadfast pillars of that earlier ecclesia. And as we think about Priscilla and Aquila, what does this constant presence tell us? Well, it no doubt speaks to us of their endurance in faith and ministry. We know that many start strong, but few finish strong. And Priscilla and Aquila didn't just have a season of service. They lived a life of service. They were reliable, they were constant, and and continued to be valued partners in the gospel, even as Paul's ministry was drawing to a close. And so when we think about the lives of these two, it challenges us as well. How committed are we for the long haul? Are we reliable in our service to God and to others? And so when we come to the end of the lives of Priscilla and Aquila, the New Testament really doesn't describe the specific circumstances of how they died. However, tradition indicates they died as martyrs. And while the exact details and location of their deaths aren't recorded, their lives were characterised by extreme dedication and personal risk for the gospel, as evidenced in Paul's statement that they risked their necks for him. And so we see that the strong commitment of Priscilla and Aquila makes the tradition of their martyrdom historically plausible within the context of the early persecution of the believers in Christ. And so we see the story of Priscilla and Aquila is really a powerful reminder that God uses ordinary people in extraordinary ways. Priscilla and Aquila were more than tent makers. And so the key takeaways from tonight, which is really just summarising the lessons, are these. This idea of gentle guidance,